Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Owen, for inviting me. Insects they occupy a near and dear spot in my heart. So we're going to cover a lot of material tonight. My main goal is to provide you with a new way to look at the creation-evolution debate. Restated, I wish to fill in the holes as I see them and develop a new approach to this very old problem. So let's go over some of this. So we're going to talk about insect stories, insect roles. So every insect has a story. They have some role. They have a physiology, no matter how big or small, like any member of the animal kingdom. Insects molt. That means they grow through shedding their skin and getting bigger. Metamorphosis, complete change in a life cycle appearance. Then we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about what the ancients knew about science. And we're going to talk about what the ancient Egyptians knew about the seasons, the solstices, the equinoxes, and what they knew about flora and fauna. We're going to discuss time as the fourth dimension. As you well know in physics and other sciences, time is considered the fourth dimension. We're going to review some ecology terms. Then we're going to talk about ecological succession, which is the turnover of organisms in a landscape. So some of you know that if you don't mow your lawn, you get weeds, and if you don't mow it for a long time, you'll get shrubs and then trees. And then we'll talk about modern problems in entomology and science in general. We're going to talk about the revolution that happened in the 1970s that kicked natural history out the door, molecular biology. We're going to talk about some of the present situation and current challenges. And then I'm going to give a new vision for entomology and science in general. And I think it's going to be pretty exciting. And if I could paraphrase Gandalf, I'd like to share the journey with you, okay? So, every parent, writer, and avid reader knows that stories can communicate truths or some message the author wants you to know. So, I can easily imagine right now laying in bed as a 2 or 3 year old and remember my mom hovering over me, her reading to me The Lion and the Mouse, Billy Goat's Gruff, the German ones, Hansel and Gretel. And so we learn a lot from stories. Most everything we learn is from story. The point I want to make here is that with our Creator, He is the author of the universe. He's referred to by St. Paul as that, right? And we know that everything He made has a story to tell. So with that, let's look at a few of his creations and examine their stories. I'm only going to review 9 insects. So there's at least 1 million described insects, which means described means someone took the time to write it, about it, study it, sketch it, and publish it. So if we do 9, that leaves 999,991 left. We can't get to them all in one night, but maybe we will over a couple years. And there's 4.5 million undescribed insects estimated, and that number changes all the time. I've seen it as high as 25 million, 20 million. Nobody knows because no one's out in the field. They're in labs and elsewhere. So this is an illustration of a bombardier beetle. This species defends itself by shooting small jets of hot, pungent, repellent liquid at would-be predators. And to me, it's pretty miraculous because all insects have some type of defense, right? Some insects, like everybody's been eating berries and you may accidentally eat a stink bug, or you may have been stung by a yellow jacket or hornet. You may try to catch a grasshopper and you see that it jumps or runs. Beetles can run. Sometimes beetles put smelly substances on you. So let's take a look at this one here. This particular insect it stores hydrogen peroxide in one part of the body. It stores hydroquinones in the other. And on a moment's notice, it can send those to a reaction chamber that has enzymes, and you have an immediate reaction that raises the temperature of those liquids to near the temperature of boiling water. And it can shoot in any direction. So if something's grabbing it on the right side, in the middle, it'll turn that jet and hit it. And it's very effective. The compounds, interesting, are the same compounds that you would see in stink bugs and skunks. Skunks, everybody in here been skunked? All right, you know how to live. So those are quinones, and they're very repellent and very noxious, right? You probably threw up? Okay. And stink bugs are pretty much the same thing. They produce quinones. So that's one insect. And they're very adept at spraying it on their attackers. This is a termite mound in Uganda. I've seen some termite mounds when I was in West Africa and Guinea-Bissau that are as tall as houses, but not quite as wide, but maybe half the width of an average house. Termites work the soil. Termites eat dead and decaying plant material. They're able to digest cellulose because of microbes in their gut. And there's all sorts of arrangements. So you can imagine a tiny termite that's about as big as your average ant. And inside them, they have protozoa in their gut. And inside the protozoa, they have bacteria. And those protozoa and bacteria work together to help break down the cellulose that is then passed on to the termite to help them grow, and they pass that on to their colony. And if you give a termite antibiotics that are antibacterial, you end up killing the termites. Termites are soil engineers. So that's their story. In areas where you find them in Africa and elsewhere, these types of big mounds, even here in Ohio, here in North Carolina you have termites, but in southern Ohio you have termites too. They break down, their role is to break down woody debris, anything with cellulose. I remember once in south of Columbus, Ohio, I was in someone's garage because they were complaining about termites, and I seen where the termites had chewed through phone books and old newspapers. So they eat anything that has cellulose. So they're soil engineers. They increase the soil carbon. Now that's really good, right? That's a benefit. You increase soil carbon, you improve water retention in the soil, and it also makes critical nutrients such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium available. So it's good for agriculture. I was part of a U.S. military training exercise in Senegal. I guess that was about maybe 10 years ago or so. We arrived at their very beginning of the rainy season, and so that rainy season would be sometime in July. And following that first rainfall at night, the sky was clouded with millions of termites. It looked like something apocalyptic. You could just look, because the Marines would have all their floodlights everywhere up in the sky, and you just see, as far as you could see, was termites. And it's a huge cloud. The following day, we'd find termites everywhere. We'd find them in our tents, our boots, our sinks, toilets. They were just everywhere. So that's fascinating. Got one more story. So the very next night, the sky became full of June bugs. All right, so everyone knows a June bug, a mermaid beetle. And the same as the termite, we'd find these everywhere. My question for you is, how do the termites and June bugs know it's the right time to emerge from the ground en masse? Well, some of you might know the answer. It's going to be temperature and humidity, and you're right. But how do they all do that all at once with that kind of synchrony where it's all in one night? Not someone taking a 1-week vacation and, well, I'm going to emerge next week and I like it here in the ground, right? They just do that. That shows intelligence. That's one of the themes of this talk, is intelligence. We don't pay enough attention to intelligence. I was doing some work for the Navy and Marines in a remote area of Uganda about 8 years ago. And I was surprised because I've read about these in books, and I've even seen a movie about them where they go and they kill people and kill animals. Actually, these types of ants can be beneficial in some villages in South America where when people know they're coming through, they can hear it because the birds are going nuts, because the birds are taking advantage of all of the quarry that the ants are flushing out of the village, and then people put their food inside pots, hang those up so the ants can't get to them, and then they just go through and clean rats and scorpions and snakes. So these are safari ants, and this column may have up to 20 million ants. Most likely they're on the run searching for food. And a popular concept in insect biology is that termites and other insects that are social, such as ants, bees, hornets, and wasps, that we best understand those when we look at those functioning as a colony, not by themselves, not individuals. So we're looking at that colony. So I'm trying to comprehend, seriously, how does a colony of 20 million ants have cohesion and know what to do, and they all have assigned roles? How do they do that? Does anybody talk about intelligence? Let's look at it. Let's look at this. It's a short video of the ants, and see if you can pick out where the guards are. They move so fast you can barely see them, right? It's just hard to concentrate on one. Okay, so you got the idea. So you may have noticed, what did you notice in those ants? The pattern, anybody know? Did you see anything? You saw some big ones. You can see the guards interspersed, but how do they know how to space themselves out? And then when I walked out and we went back to our station, I saw one crawling up my pants, and I thought I'd let it get on my hand and take a nip. It didn't bite too hard, but you can see that even though the nest it left is 5, 10, 15 minutes ago, it still is doing the job that it's programmed to do. They're very tenacious. I worked with hornets and yellow jackets in graduate school. This picture shows a very large nest of German yellow jackets in Columbus, Ohio. And the nest is about 3.5 feet high, about 2.5 feet wide, and 1.5 feet thick. And when I went into that initially to take some samples and remove the nest, I felt like I was watching Alfred Hitchcock's Birds, because it was so quiet up there. And you saw all these nests there, hornet yellow jackets on the cover, and I was wondering what was going to happen. So this nest would have probably over 5,000 workers. Yellow jackets and hornets are important predators of many pest insects. A good-sized yellow jacket nest can bring in hundreds, maybe 1,000 insects a day. And I'll tell you a story here. This is one of my favorite yellow jacket stories in Columbus, Ohio. Everybody ever been to the Park of Roses in Columbus? Okay, just my family? Okay, all right. Well, it's worth going. It's on High Street, north of the campus. It's a really beautiful park. And I was doing foraging experiments with yellow jackets there. And every morning, well, not every morning, about 3 times a week, I would bring these buckets, 5-gallon buckets worth of food with me, sealed, and I would walk about 350 yards to the center of the Park of Roses, and I would put these dishes down, and I would take counts of which species preferred which kind of food. And I had caterpillars and tuna and watermelon, dog food, you name it. I had all kinds of foods. And a lot of them are scavengers. The German yellow jacket's a good example. It's both predator and scavenger. Well, after about my 5th trip out there in the morning, as soon as I get out of the car, and scientists know this, that there is facial recognition with yellow jackets and hornets. So they would meet me at my car, and when I opened up the buckets, they'd be landing on the buckets, and there'd be a cloud of yellow jackets that would fly around me as I walked to this foraging site. But seriously, think about this for a minute. How is that any different than dogs? Like, if you knew that somebody had dogs out there and you're bringing food to them, do you think they'd wait there, or they'd meet you at the car, right? So again, let's talk about intelligence. So let's look at this video. If you want, I can show you. We have 2 yellow jacket nests behind the building. I was showing the class that this morning, but here's some yellow jackets. You've seen these. Most of the time, it looks like a mess of yellow specks going in and out of the ground. A nest like this is in Lakewood, Ohio, may have about 1,500 to 3,000 yellow jackets. They look for a decayed root passage, and maybe the queen likes that, and she starts building her nest, and then when the workers emerge, they just keep taking soil out of the ground, and you can have a big hole. I know I've taken some nests out of places in Virginia that when I went to step on the ground to wake up the yellow jackets, I went 2 feet, almost 2 feet in the ground, and there's a nest the size of a laundry basket in there. So I've always loved hornets, and they're my favorite insect. In fact, if God has hornet farms up in heaven, I'd volunteer to tend his hornets for him. People enjoy destroying their nests, but one modest-sized colony can consume a couple hundred flies daily. And some of the biggest nests I've collected have been from livestock farms, horse farms, pig farms, and with cattle. You can see, if you ever watch sometimes on a farm, you'll see hornets picking off flies off the ears of these animals, and they'll just pounce on them. And immediately, the first thing they do is they cut off the legs, cut off the wings, cut off the head, and chew the rest of the body into a pulpy mass. So again, this shows intelligence. They just do that instinctively. You can predict it and see it happen. I used to keep hornet nests in cages for my research. They became habituated to their feeding schedule. When I would bring them food in the morning, they saw me coming, they would wait by the doors to the cage flaps. And I would put the food in there, and they would just hover, and they couldn't wait to get to the food. They didn't think about leaving. They understood their limits, and they were happy in the cages. Again, that shows intelligence. And I'm going to repeat this again, that I think we need intelligence to recognize intelligence. So here's a hornet nest we had in our neighborhood. They're so much fun to watch. If you ever get close to a nest, you can probably get about 1.5 feet away with a camera if you move really slowly and you're not right in a direct flight path. If you've read in the past about cobras and other types of venomous snakes, you know that many times these venomous snakes will not deliver a load of venom when they bite, that they're gonna bite you, and they're just gonna give you a warning bite, let you know. Hornets do the same thing. If you get near their nest too close, they'll pop you in the head, maybe in the neck, and they won't deliver much venom. It'll hurt, but it's not gonna be like when you terrorize their nest and they dump on you. So again, it shows a proportional response to a threat. That shows intelligence. Okay. Here are our daughters 16 years ago. And if you've never had a hornet nest on your property, I do feel sorry for you. Sometimes insects make mistakes. The queen built this nest so its back was attached to our movable garage door. All right, and on the other side, it's on the southwest corner of a house. So it's got two problems it has to deal with. It has to deal with the moving garage door, and then it has to deal with the excessive heat that comes in the summer. Now, hornets, they're like honeybees. They will cool their nest if it gets too hot. They keep it at about 28.3 degrees centigrade year-round. If it's too hot, they will bring moisture or drops of water in, and they will fan that, and they'll do it in phase to cool the nest. If it's too cold, they're like bees. They can uncouple their flight muscles from their wings and just vibrate their muscles and generate heat and raise the temperature. So they make mistakes. Every time we open this door, it would rip open the back of the nest. I felt sorry for them, I really did, because they did us a favor by building it there, and they'd be in a frenzy when that nest was ripped open. It's kind of fun to watch, and it would take a while for them to calm down. In the meantime, I would go inside the garage, I would lift our daughters up on my shoulder, and we'd peer in the nest, and you could see the mother hornet tending her young. And you could see the workers tending the young, and they didn't mind us there, and we didn't bother them. And my wife, Clara, asked me one day, she says, well, what if the neighbors say something? And I said, well, we'll take care of that when it happens. And then I said, what if somebody gets stung? I said, well, if it gets stung, I'll take it down, no problem. And no one ever got stung except me one time when I got careless, and that was it. But it stayed there the whole year, but it didn't do well because, again, its back was open, and it had to deal with cooling the nest. So they papered over this. They papered over the back of that nest. Now, where in their evolutionary history did they learn how to paper over a nest when it's been ripped open by a garage door, right? I mean, doesn't that show incredible intelligence to do that? And it was a nice smooth line so that when the garage door opened, the door would slide right over the paper. That was it, right? So this shows omniscience of a creator, right? So that intelligence, they show learning, just in that simple thing with a nest, learning, memory, and behavioral responses to problems. So paper wasps. I raised these in the laboratory too. We saw some of these outside today. Actually, I'd never seen this before, but we have those fall webworms in the back. And we saw a paper wasp inside there, and it was trying to work its way through. And I think one of them was chewing on a caterpillar because they love caterpillars. When I was in the lab at Ohio State, I used to feed these by hand. And initially they were reluctant to take it, but after a while they became habituated and they would accept my mealworm offering and go about their business. This is a mud wasp in Germany. These are mud wasps, three nests on our daughter's raincoat. And of course, they didn't tell me what happened until it was too late. They'd partially destroyed the nest, and they found paralyzed spiders inside. And if you know about wasps that feed on spiders, what they do is they will sting a spider and return it to the nest, and they pack it in these mud tubes. And when it gets to be a certain size with so many spiders, they lay an egg in it, then they seal it with mud, and then the egg hatches and consumes the spiders. So there's a couple things that could go wrong here. The first one of these is you have spiders that are paralyzed by this venom. Not killed, but paralyzed. Why would you just want to paralyze it and not kill it? Well, because they want to have fresh food, right? And so also the venom contains antimicrobial agents. So these kill fungi, they kill molds, they kill yeasts. So the spider looks nice and fresh. So the girls found spiders, and then they decided to shut the windows to the apartment. In Germany, they're mostly civilized, but they don't keep screens on their windows. And they shut all the windows except for one. It's because they had to let air come through, but it was on the other side of the apartment. So the spider would come in, the wasp would come in through the back window, but now it would fly around to the front of the apartment, in front of the building, fly through a window in the hallway and come in the window that way to bring the spiders and mud. So doesn't that show the mother's love for her young? Doesn't that show intelligence, right? That they're not giving up once they start doing something. This is probably one of my favorite insects. There are about 1/2 insects you find on the snow in the wintertime. You can see them anywhere between December and April. There are winter moths, there's snow stoneflies, there's midges, there's springtails. This one here, you see it in unusual conditions. Usually you find it around mosses and a non-vascular plant called a liverwort. And it's about 3/16 of an inch long. Interesting, these use a strategy of ice-nucleating proteins and little types of alcohols called polyols. The nucleating proteins do what, say, colloids do in the tree. They pack in between the cells to prevent ice crystals from forming. The alcohols or polyols depress the supercooling point so they can withstand very cold temperatures. I brought one into the lab one time just to test on one of our machines to see what's the coldest it could withstand. And this was after it was warmed up, so it wasn't really fair. But it was able to stay alive down to 18 degrees below zero. Probably could have stayed longer if I hadn't warmed it up. So we think again of winter is a lifeless time of year. And even in our national forests, when I lived in Virginia, in Blacksburg, you could go out in the forest, you wouldn't see any birds and mammals because they all want to be near the feeding stations in the city, right? Most of them are there. You'll see occasional woodpecker or something, but there's hardly anything back there. So in these places, you'd find these scorpion flies. So in the high elevations of Giles and Montgomery counties, Virginia, one day it was about 5 degrees outside. There was 15 inches of snow on the ground. And I couldn't believe that I would see these insects crawling around on the snow. So again, I'll go back to the same thing. I sometimes wonder if he put those here to confound us, right? I mean, seriously, think about this. Could the world do without the little snow scorpion fly, right? I mean, he made them for a purpose, right? So they serve some purpose, but is it something that's really necessary? Well, what's it doing there in the middle of winter, right? All right, so now we're going to really transition. We're going to discuss roles in the insect environment. And essentially there's five main roles. They do decomposition, nutrient cycling, they feed on plants, they pollinate, they disperse seeds, and they do these trophic interactions, which are part of food webs or food chains, right? So, for example, if you're in a stream, you have mayflies or midges, and those feed fish or they feed other insects. Dragonflies feed on those. There's just really complex flow of energy. So that's what I mean by trophic interactions, is flow of energy. So we're going to look at the first of these, the insects that are decomposers and nutrient recyclers. We'll start with the carrion feeders. What happens when an animal dies? The bacteria on the mucous membranes begin to break down the tissues. Gases are released into the air, primarily ethyl mercaptan. And this is the same thing if any of you have natural gas in your house. You know that they add this, we call it a stinker. The gas company calls it a stinker because it gives off a smell so that you know that there's a gas leak, right? But this also attracts flies, carrion beetles, and even vultures. So let's look at a couple things on this slide here. We had some mice problem in our garage all the time, and I trapped this mole, and you can see within hours it's got blowflies on it. This was a dead squirrel in a nearby park, and this one's kind of unique because the mother that made that, it's a flesh fly, and they don't lay eggs. They deposit living larvae. So you see, as soon as that fly leaves, you can see the larvae squirming around trying to get inside and have its meal. This slide will show the importance of carrying feeding insects, what they remove in the wild. The insects I just listed, you have blowflies, flesh flies, house flies. They consume and remove and recycle 30 to 60% of dead animals. So isn't that incredible? So what I'm saying is if you had a 40-pound dog that's dead on the side of the road, 12 to 24 pounds of that animal's soft tissues will be removed and recycled by flies. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? Now just think of all the dead animals in the forests and on the roads and on the highways through the year, and you can imagine the important job that flies have, right? So they recycle all the nutrients and minerals. Let's turn our attention to trees and decomposition. Whether a tree is a hardwood or a conifer, 30% of its matter is consumed by insects. So let's say you have a 100-pound chunk of firewood that's laying there on the forest floor. 100 pounds to about 30 pounds of that will be consumed by insects. The rest of it goes to fungi and fungi feeding insects. So another way to look at it is 1/3 of a dead tree is consumed by insects. One of the more well-known beetles that initially begins the decomposition process is this bark beetle. It responds to chemicals released by a diseased or dying tree. It bores into the tree. It has a structure on the dorsal surface right here that's called the mycangium. And the mycangium stores fungal spores, mold spores, yeast spores, and bacteria. So let's examine the death of the tree, and I'll talk about that beetle in a second. So here's how a tree dies. It's old, it's stressed from competition with other trees, not enough nutrients, not enough water, not enough sunlight, and its metabolism changes. Just like people get a fever, trees similarly get a fever. We don't call it a fever, but their metabolism speeds up, and it releases chemicals, and we can identify these chemicals in the laboratory, and we have. And the minute the tree releases these chemicals, you have clouds of these beetles that come in, and there's nothing the tree can do to stop it, and they attack the beetles en masse. They bring the spores in the tree. The spores germinate and quickly spread through the tree. So you can imagine networks of fungi, molds, yeast, bacteria traveling through the tree to break down that tree. The tree becomes infested, and it begins a slow death. So that's pretty incredible, right? I can't go to Lowe's or Home Depot and say, hey, I need a roadkill remover that'll get rid of most of my roadkill in 8 days, or I can't get rid of, do you have something that can get rid of a tree on its own? You just can't do that. So again, this shows really creative intelligence. So here's another example of decomposition and recycling, and these are mites, soil mites. When I was in graduate school, I worked on a project up in the Appalachians, and I was examining the soil arthropod fauna in the forests of Southwest Virginia. I knew that if I came across, if I picked up a handful of leaf litter in the forest, that's the leaves on top of the soil, and right below that, but above the soil, you have decomposing matter. We call that duff. If you pick up a handful of that duff in the leaf litter, you may have 3,000 to 5,000 mites in that one handful. Now multiply that by every piece of the landscape, how many mites you have in a forest. It's pretty mind-boggling. So these mites, they process and remove 10 to 20% of the leaf litter in the forest. But that's not it. So let this next point sink in. Can anybody do a drum roll here? Okay. In short, soil regenerates itself. You may not know that, but they do. So these mites help regenerate soil. They produce soil. And in general, scientists recognize that it takes about 25 years for 1 inch of soil to establish itself from decomposition. So that's just the tiny soil mites that do that. All right, let's shift gears and remind ourselves that insects are living entities in His creation, right? So one day I was sitting on a bench in the front yard. It happened to be a nice summer evening, and I had a lot on my mind. You sometimes get like that, and you think, can't wait for tomorrow to get here. And I had a small beetle known as a shining flower beetle land on my arm. It had to be less than a 32nd of an inch, or a little bit less than a millimeter. And I got to thinking. It reminded me to think about something else. And I happened to think that if I could travel through space, like they always send spaceships to look for life on other planets, but if you could find just one organism like this on another planet, you'd think it was miraculous, right? But yet, we're daily surrounded by countless miracles, and we never give it a thought. Why? So I think we need to go on the offense when we're looking at living organisms and take it from a holistic point of view, that there's more to these than we give a thought to. And I put together this chart to show even though some of these insects are microscopic, like that tiny beetle, it carries out the same life processes as we do, okay? It's got a skin, okay? And in insects, all of these would be the same for insects. The only thing you could combine you could combine what we call the integumentary system and the skeleton. Those would be one system. That would be considered the integumentary system. But they have muscles. They have the same muscle proteins that we do, the actin and myosin. They have a dorsal aorta which functions as a heart, and they have blood or hemolymph. They have a brain, and they have nerves. They conduct gas exchange inside plant leaves, underwater, in raw sewage, inside a cocoon. Wherever they are, if they're alive, they're conducting gas exchange. They have hormones. They remove wastes. They reproduce. They have sensory receptors. Okay. And they have immune systems too. So bear in mind that that beetle I was talking about is a little less than a millimeter long, right? It has all these systems in it. It's like my professor, one of the professors used to say all the time, he said, it's a happy accident. So we're going to shift gears here again and talk about molting and metamorphosis. Molting, as I showed in an earlier stage, molting is shedding a skin to enable larger growth. Metamorphosis is a change in a body structure. So you may be familiar with that from your science classes in 5th grade. You have a housefly, you have an egg, larva, pupa, an adult. Frogs, you have an egg, tadpole, froglet, and then a frog. So insects. So metamorphosis is incredible. In terms of complexity, there are only 3 processes in the world that can compete with it. The human brain has 86 billion neurons, from what I've read, and each of those can form thousands of synaptic connections with other nerves. The immune system in a human, there's memory and adaptation. Memory and learning is part of adaptation. Embryogenesis, just taking a fertilized egg or a zygote and completing a process of embryogenesis, is very complex. So we're used to seeing complexity. So for our example of molting, we're going to talk about the Cecropia moth. And I should tell you that one of the fun hobbies we've always had every winter is we go out into the woods and we'll bring back cocoons of some of the silk moths that we find in Ohio. And we bring them back and we keep them in the garage where they can stay cold. And we watch them hatch in the spring. And at some point we let them go. And we may take them back to the place where we found the cocoon. And they're fun to watch emerge. But a couple years ago, we took 2 Cecropia moths that happened to mate in the box. And the female was laying eggs, so we took the eggs and we hatched them. And you can see here on the right, there's a young Cecropia larva about the size of less than the width of a dime. And you can see how small the eggs are. And I should tell you that most insects have, and everything, it usually has very high mortality. This insect may produce 150 to 300 eggs. You're lucky if you get 1 or 2 adults. They have very high mortality for many reasons. And that's true with most things in the insect world. So here's a video of our Cecropia moth caterpillar feeding on privet. And you can see this just shovels it away, right? How does it know how to do that? Someone tell me. It's all instinct, right? They just know what to do. That's what they're programmed to do. So this devoured privet leaves all summer long. And here's a Cecropia caterpillar that just molted. Now, what's interesting about molting, look at the wonderful design. What a sensitive hand in the design of this, because when a caterpillar sheds its skin, it reabsorbs 99.5% of the nutrients that were in that skin. And they shed just the outer part of it. All right? So we want to turn that caterpillar into a moth. So now we have to go and look at some of these stages. We're going to demystify molting and metamorphosis. Like, excuse me, like everything in the biological world, every single process is mediated by the chemical messengers known as hormones, right? Everything. In insects, there are two hormones that dominate changes in the life stage. Juvenile hormone is the hormone that's known as a status hormone. It keeps the insect in a growing phase. When it's time to molt, the brain knows. The brain shuts off the juvenile hormone. It turns on another hormone that's called the molting hormone, known as ecdysone. And that causes the insect to begin to molt. So during a change in life stage, in an insect undergoing metamorphosis, one hormone increases, one decreases. So during this stage, in the pre-molt, the caterpillar stops feeding. We can see this. They climb up a branch and they release all their gut contents, and they do that to reduce their weight and to reduce the water, because they have to spend the whole fall, winter, and early spring in a cocoon. In fact, the adults don't even have mouths. They don't feed. So they have to come out 9 months later, lay eggs, and get on with their lives. I mean, it's so incredible, right? So the old cuticle detaches. The next part's apolysis. The cuticle detaches from the top layer of skin. Then it sheds its old cuticle and it reveals the pupal covering. And everybody knows that, right? It looks like a miniature moth with stubby wings. At this point, this is the fun part. At this point, larval tissues completely break down through enzymes and specialized cells. It releases nutrients. And if you open this up, the pupa up at this stage, you would find a soupy mess. And in fact, I have done it, and it kind of reminded me of a malted milkshake inside with heavy on the malt syrup inside. So, and inside, you can see there's little clusters inside, and these little clusters are called imaginal discs. Now get this. So these imaginal discs are in there, but when do you think these imaginal discs are made? They're made 24 to 48 hours after the egg has been laid. So something that caterpillar is eventually going to use in 4 or 5 months is made the same time the egg is being laid. So isn't that incredible? All right. The next phase is organogenesis. So this is where the organs form and they rewire the nervous system. Then there's what's called eclosion or hatching. Eclosion sounds fancy, right? You're going to press them, but hey, we closed the mosh today, but that's all it means is hatching. It removes from its pupal case. Now get this. I know in the Polyphemus moth, they store additional potassium ions to make what you would call almost a lye-like solution. So when it comes time to emerge in the spring, they secrete this from their gut, essentially like vomiting, but they're releasing this solution to loosen the silk fibers so they can push themselves out. I mean, we could go on and on all day like this. So this is just the butterflies and moths, right? But there's also other insects that do this too. Flies, beetles, bees and wasps, they all do this complete metamorphosis. And here's a pupa and a cast skin so you get an idea. This is actually from an imperial moth. Anybody get to take a look at the imperial moth today? Okay, a few people did, yeah. All right, so it's great. So that's what the pupa looks like next to a diamond. You can see the antennae up here, and you can see the wing fold. And here's what the cast skin looks like when they get rid of it. And there's your Cecropia moth, freshly hatched. This is one of our biggest silk moths in North America, and it can be up to 6.5-inch wingspan. And the scientists who've worked on this, they've studied their silk production, and they make 3 different types of silk during 3 different parts of the cocoon cycle. And they interfered with the development by removing parts of the mouth or wearing it down. They found that the Cecropia caterpillar measures the silk that it lays down for each stage. So That's incredible. And you can see those big feathery antennae. And those are chemoreceptors or chemical receptors. Now, the neat thing about those is the Cecropia moth can detect females, the male can detect females up to 5 miles away. All right? Now, here's a trade-off, because the Cecropia moth, they have all these hairs on them and scales, and essentially these chemicals called pheromones are impregnated, so they can leave a trail wherever they fly. And they also release it through other parts of the body. And think about this now, because the pheromone, that chemical, if it's too low of a molecular weight, it'd be a high pressure, it would just dissipate into the atmosphere. If it's too heavy, it wouldn't evaporate. So it has to be just the right size, the right molecular weight. So I think that's pretty incredible. And it's fun to watch those come out and then let them go. This is a Polyphemus moth. We hatched, I saw she had a Polyphemus moth she hatched, so she's on the board from Germany yet. And they also have a 6-inch wingspan. Look at that coloration on there, and this is supposed to be a startle response. On this eye spot here, I'll blow up the eye spot here for you. Look at that eye spot, right? Could be a predator. If you ever see a bird around one of these and they flash their wings and they reveal that eye spot, those birds just take off right away. So it is a threat. But see how that little center's transparent? I could probably write a couple pages just to discuss how complex it is to make that eye spot. So I can't, again, help thinking how these gorgeous insects, do these really need to be here, right? The forests could probably live without the Polyphemus and Cecropia chewing on their leaves, but we accept he made them for some purpose, right? We accept that. They give him glory, and it's for our benefit, and you can see it. Nobody can hold on to one of those and not smile or, bring some joy in their lives. So I didn't think there was any way I could develop a presentation like this without discussing the ancient Egyptians, and for several reasons. They were quite advanced in science and left us a rich legacy in astronomy, agriculture, animal husbandry, food, medicine, etc. And bear with me a little bit, because I'm going to talk about 3 things with them. I'm going to talk just very briefly their astronomy, cosmology, and ecology. So we can predict the rising and setting of the sun and moon to the minute. Well, we think that's a big deal, and it is, right? We can also predict the solstices and the equinoxes, and the ancient Egyptians could do both of these. Though they couldn't do it to the minute because they didn't have our timekeeping or clock, but they knew when these events were. So this is the great temple of Ramses II in Abu Simbel, and I want to review how the ancient Egyptians used the construction of this construction of this temple to showcase their knowledge of astronomy. So take a look at this door here. On 2 days a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the light would pass in through this door, travel through this hypostyle hall, and then go in the back, and that's called the inner sanctum. And it would hit these three likenesses, with 3 of them are deities, and one of them would be Ramses II. The light would pass there and hit that for a half hour, 200 feet, and they would do that twice a year. So I really want to make sure you know they knew a lot about astronomy. They knew about movements of the sun. And there's only the one deity here that stayed in the darkness. This is the famous temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak. It embodied their cosmological myths. So I'm going to show you here. They had I'm going to zoom in on this section here in the back and take a closer look at it. Okay? So you can see the mud brick wall that surrounds this temple. This is the temple, and it symbolized the mound. And the ancient Egyptians thought that, with their cosmology, that this represented life in creation, that life emerged from primordial waters. So that's part of their cosmology. A quick prelude to the next two slides. The ancient Egyptians, and this is some points I want to really make hammer home. They chronicled many aspects of their daily lives, their religion, and natural history. They have reliable records of the flora and fauna. And what I'm saying is that when we visit their tombs, their carvings and paintings, they provide a basis of comparison for what's there today. So this is a marsh scene in the tomb of Nakht, and we can see herons, ducks, geese, butterflies, southern race of the domestic cat. These are 3,500 years old. This is the tomb of Pabasa, the royal beekeeper. And they moved beehives up and down the river, the Nile, to take advantage of the growing seasons for nectar flows, right? So they knew how to do that. And we do that today in this country, right? If you own an apple orchard, you contact a beekeeper and they'll send beehives as soon as the apple blossoms are in bloom. So the ancient Egyptians know how to do this. So the ancient Egyptians understood the timing and synchrony found in nature. Our first example showed knowledge of time and the solar system, right? And we do that. Our second example with beekeeping shows a keen understanding of timing of events or the synchrony in the ecosystem. So let's talk about time. Biology recognizes time as the fourth dimension, and when we add climate and temperature, we get what's called phenology, right? We can make predictions. So I remember several years ago, we were sitting in our breakfast table, and a hummingbird came up and tapped on our window in spring. And I remember, I thought the rhododendrons are blooming, so why we need to feed the hummingbird? That's what it was telling us, right? So we put hummingbird food in. I gave examples of termites and June bugs in Africa, but I also, when living in Virginia, I knew that queens of the bald-faced hornet would appear annually sometime around May 12th to May 18th. This is one of the hibernating queens. And this is a fist-size orchid that I'd find up in Giles County that I could visit year after year. I knew that it bloomed in the first week of August. All right? So those are examples of phenology, that what we know. You can see that insects and plants and everything in the biological world runs on a synchronized schedule. We're going to cover one more topic before we wrap it up. Just some ecology terms here. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but ecological succession is the process by which the structure of biological communities changes over time. So that means if I go out to the local forest here and if I could get a bulldozer, a land mover, and clear off the entire landscape, I can come back in a couple of weeks and I know there's plants, insects, birds, and fungi. I come back in a couple of years, there's small trees and shrubs. I come back in 80 years, there's a full forest, okay? That's what's built into our world, right? Ecological succession. So, this is the island of Surtsey off the coast of Iceland. It erupted in 1963 to 1967. And at the end of 1964, so a year later, they found bacteria, molds, and fungi and insects on Surtsey, just a brand new volcanic island showing up in the middle of the North Atlantic. And you can see by 2004, it's teeming with birds, lichens, all types of plants, and there's 300 invertebrate species, which would include insects as well. Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980 in May, and it was allegedly like a 10 to 50 megaton explosion. It could be heard hundreds of miles away. And you can see here that the mountain essentially burned superheated gas, ash, There was mud flows. It was just death and destruction. It was a barren landscape. You go to Mount St. Helens today, and it's thriving ecosystems. There's new ponds there, there's new lakes, and all species have returned except for a few of those. And I just mentioned what happens if we do that here. So, everybody holding out okay? So the last thing we'll talk about, we revisit this slide from before. Everything made by the author of life, our creator, has a story to tell. You can go out and investigate anything. Natural history is a scientific study of organisms in their environment. So if you birdwatch with binoculars and you have a book, you're doing natural history. If you go out and look at wildflowers in a park with a field guide, you're doing natural history. And you can do very good science with natural history. It relies on observations without experimental manipulation. So why am I bringing this to your attention? Well, we had a battle in the 1970s. It started really at Harvard, and E.O. Wilson, who's a top entomologist, wrote about this, that the molecular biology people were kicking aside, becoming hostile to natural history. And he wrote about this in his book, and it caused a shift in how we looked at the biological world. We began looking at DNA to reinforce classification systems, but it didn't stop there. We began looking for ways to develop products and commercialize organismal DNA. Look at Ozempic. Where does Ozempic come from? It's a Gila monster toxin, right? But they tell you it's a natural-like substance that would occur in your body otherwise. What were the consequences of this period? We lost field classes. Okay, so I had one of the best professors I ever had. They began canceling his courses in the early 1980s. And he wanted everybody to understand about creation and look at plants, look at ecology, see the world for what it is. So they started getting rid of the classes. There was a diminution in interest because now you had to do molecular biology if you wanted to look like you're doing something worthwhile in the university. So we might pause for one moment and reflect on the question, what was and what is guiding science? Okay? So we've lost knowledgeable people who can tell us about our world. So you notice I showed you pictures about the ancient Egyptians. They knew how to survive in their world. They knew about their animal ecology and plant ecology and agriculture. And we're losing that. Everything is now a TikTok app or a YouTube video or go to Google. But no one has that encyclopedic knowledge that we'd expect from seriously trained scientists. Our cherished institutions, museums. Many of the museums that have downsized with changes in their mission. Some have removed or neglected their collections, so you quietly erode away at our heritage, right? If you're losing insects, you're losing specimens, and you're substituting inside that, you're putting in spaces for weddings, for conferences, other events. So I was at the Sedgwick Museum in Cambridge. It's 20-some years ago. And it was such a beautiful museum because you walk in there and it's nothing but cases and you're kind of expected to know what's going on. There's not a food court and a coffee machine and all kinds of little press a button to see what this is. And you feel like you're in something grand. So, molecular biology is like any other tool. It has its uses. We can never throw away the baby with the bathwater. Yet, despite the shortcomings and incomplete knowledge resulting from the loss of field studies, there's a perception that science will reveal all the secrets of the universe. And I put the smiley face up there just because it's really telling. I mean, I've had people tell me that science will discover. Well, the problem with science is when we discover something, it's just that it raises new questions. So what we end up doing is developing higher webs of complexity. So what else do they offer? The people I mean the people who specialize in classification. It often seems as their fascination revolves around the links and branches of the evolutionary tree. They always posit a hypothetical ancestor or ancestors, and these are theoretical. Why? because they're always undergoing research and debate. They have incomplete fossil records, and they're difficult to prove ancestral linkage with certainty. But can they ever be satisfied? Think for one moment about the battles that have occurred over the decades with who has the older fossils and their interpretation. So, for example, Donald Johanson and the Leakey family. These clashes result in the loss of collegiality and fraternalism, and that trickles down to all the departments, because anybody who publishes in an academic journal today knows that inevitably, unless you're a big name and connected to a big name, it's always a hostile review. So now we move forward with a new synthesis. And I want you to remember what I was talking about earlier, please. Does anyone talk about intelligence anymore? You saw their roles. You saw how they're involved in succession. It takes intelligence to recognize intelligence. All insects and every creature have a story to tell. All insects have roles. We can count on flies to consume and recycle carrion. We can count on hornets to hunt flies and other insects. We can count on insects and fungi to break down trees and recycle their nutrients. We can count on soil mites to make soil. We know that insect roles are fixed. For as smart as I think my hornets are, and they understand that, I know not one of them could be a concert violinist. But there is some flexibility in nature. So, for example, it was 25 years ago, somewhere in Virginia, I think it was Montgomery County, there were big flocks of turkey vultures, and vultures are scavengers, but there was limited carrion, and they were turning to predation. So they were eating young livestock. Deer, we think of deer as these nice little Bambi herbivores that feed on plants and nuts on the ground, but then every now and then we catch them eating ground nesting bird eggs. So yeah, I'm not saying that deer is going to turn into a carnivore, but I'm saying that there's plasticity or flexibility built into the animal kingdom. As before, we can visit the tombs of the pharaohs and corroborate the behaviors and ecology for many species. So I have books at home, I have journals. There are thousands and thousands of panels in the tombs where you can visit the tombs and look and see these insects, birds, plants, tell what species they are, and compare them with what we have today. And if anything, we see a loss of species, but we can't measure what we can't record. Right? If we can't record something, there's nothing we can do with it. So we believe that His creation is good, and we see the importance of phenology. Phenology is the clock-like work appearance of organisms year after year. We see the omniscience and succession, the biological and ecological sequence of events. These give rise to ecosystems and biomes. So we need to change our perspective. When we study anything in nature, our focus should always be on the old unfolding mysteries. What is it? What is its role? When does it appear? Our problem is that we can't see everything at once, but we should try. We really should try to look at everything, and we should really be on the fence. This is because we are really thinking God's thoughts after Him, to quote Sir Isaac Newton. That's what scientists are supposed to do. So insects are part of His design, and He sustains them. Insects are His secondary causes or agents for sustaining and maintaining the Earth's ecosystems and biomes. They spend their entire lives doing what they're programmed to do. And you think about it, look at that robin hunting worms on the yard, or laying its eggs, or spending time with its nestlings. It's working. Why is it doing that? Well, that's what it's programmed to do. So truly, insects are agents of wonder. They're really incredible. And that's all I have. I'll take any questions. We have